I remember, for me, I can remember the moment. I can remember a couple of days after the moment, but there's a lot of blur.
Oh, yeah, there's a whole lot of blur. I remember, when I went home, it just everything stood still. Everything was still. And I couldn't understand how, in my world, I felt like I was just right in that moment, but everything else kept going around me. The house that we lived in, we had built. And I remember when I went home, the feeling was, Hi there, and welcome to episode 2 of the Resilience Reborn podcast. I'm Angie.
And I'm Trey.
We are excited for you to be listening in today. We're going to take a deep dive into our personal narratives, our stories of our life-changing adversities, which both of them include a traumatic loss in our life. So we're just going to kind of go through each of our stories and then kind of culminate with why we're here right now in this space.
Yes. Just to give you an idea who we are, why we're on this journey to help others that have gone through these situations. Nothing about therapy, nothing about any of this stuff, just about what we did and how we ended up here. So if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, go for it.
So I know, obviously, a bunch of your story, but why don't we start from the beginning, kind of how long you and Kyle dated, who he was as a person, and then kind of flow into, where everything took a turn.
Okay. So I was just a little hometown girl. Had everything going for me in life, actually. Had a great childhood. Actually met Kyle when we were freshmen in high school at a national youth conference. I met him in Colorado, actually, at this youth conference. And while we were so young at the time.
How old were you?
15. Yeah, sorry. 15. And we met on this 1-week trip, and after that, it was still long distance on the telephone, so we kind of lost touch. Didn't really, we knew that there was kind of, or I felt that there was something there then. But we lost touch because we were in high school and we went to different high schools. We lived about 30 minutes apart from each other. And then he called me on my 17th birthday, which was right before my senior year of high school. And that's when we started dating.
Okay. I think I knew that.
Yeah, we started dating then, and we dated throughout college. I went to Radford University. He went to Virginia Tech. And then we got married right away in June of 2001.
So how old were you when you got married?
I had just turned 22.
Okay. So just out of college?
Just out of college,
okay.
Yeah. He got a job with Circuit City. Their headquarters were based in Richmond. So we moved to Richmond, Virginia.
The old Circuit City?
Yes.
I remember that.
Yes. Circuit City. He was employed by Circuit City. So we got married in 2001, lived in an apartment, just had a really great life, actually. We were really involved in our church, and he was promoted several times within Circuit City, brought him to where he actually ended up, the plane crashing. So in 2005, February 16th, he was on Circuit City's corporate jet and it crashed.
Okay. Let's kind of go back to the beginning of when the circumstances around. What do you remember about the day that you found out about this? Because I can specifically remember the day that, when I get into my story about my mom passing. What do you remember about that day? Do you remember much?
Yeah, there are bits and pieces. And I think maybe just to kind of preface everything, I actually had a premonition that this was going to happen. He came home in December of that, December 2004, and said he got this promotion and he was going to be flying on the corporate jet. And I actually told him he couldn't go. I said, there's something that I feel very strongly about, that you just cannot fly on that jet. And it was dismissed. We never talked about it much. So,
and by the way, I think for me at that age, maybe even now, I would hard question that as well, because
100%.
it's very hard. That's a hard thing to wrap your head around, especially when you're going for a promotion and you're going to be on this corporate jet. Like, it sounds amazing, like an amazing opportunity.
Yes.
So,
and even I think, as I've thought more about it, we were very, very into our faith as a couple. And so, I think back then I almost was like, whoa, I don't know these type of things, like
Right.
that's really, it's a hard concept to, but I just had this feeling that this was going to happen. So I even went as far as the night before, I actually went and cut his alarm off so he would not wake up.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I knew that if I did that, it probably would cause a lot of trouble in our relationship and our marriage. So I went and I cut it back on. And I briefly remember that morning him getting up really early because he had to drive himself to the airport. And he just kissed me on the cheek, I think, and said, "I love you." And I went off to work that day, and I don't even know what time of day it was, but I got a call into my classroom. I was a teacher, and they said they need you in the front office. And so I went to the front office, and there was this man on the other end of the phone. And all I remember is him telling me, there was a jet flying with Circuit City. There were 8 people, and there are no survivors.
Wow. And at that moment on the phone, I mean, did you
I don't know exactly how I reacted until I went back and read my journals. I know that I was in disbelief. I think I pretty much was telling him that he was lying. It wasn't true. I know I was yelling, and I think someone, an office, staff member, had to take the phone from me, and because I was in the middle of the front office. So they took me back to like a conference room, and from then on, I don't know exactly. I was feeling that I knew that it was right, that it really did happen, but then it didn't happen. Had to call his family. I couldn't get in touch with his parents. I think I ended up finally talking to his sister, actually, and she thought I was playing a joke on her. And I do remember that specifically. She said, "Why would you joke about that?" And then I think I remember someone drove me home. They drove me home to my house. I know you're very close with your parents. Did you call them immediately? Did you wait till you? Yeah, I think so. I think that one of my colleagues had to go get my phone to even find numbers. And so they helped me. I don't specifically remember talking to my family.
Yeah.
I remember talking to a sister, but not my family. But clearly they were on the road to come to Richmond. I'm sure they got there pretty soon. Yeah. So that, in a nutshell, is my story. My first husband died in a plane crash. Yeah, so that's my story.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more to it.
There is.
Yeah, it's like, what do you... I remember, for me, I can remember the moment. I can remember a couple of days after the moment, but there's a lot of blur.
Oh, yeah, there's a whole lot of blur. I remember, when I went home, it just everything stood still. Everything was still. And I couldn't understand how, in my world, I felt like I was just right in that moment, but everything else kept going around me. The house that we lived in, we had built. And I remember when I went home, the feeling was awful.
I can imagine.
It was an awful feeling to be in that place. It felt cold, and it felt dark. And I that's probably just how I felt inside. Not that it was actually that way, but I think there was just so much that I had to deal with at that point. And it was really weird for me because it was national news. So it was scrolling all across every TV, in America, which added a whole other layer to what was happening with me the fact that, you know, his name was scrolling. They didn't know why. They didn't know what happened. There were just so many questions, I think. I was angry. I was mad at him because he didn't listen to me and I knew it was going to happen. Mm-hmm. There were just so many emotions. And the journey for me afterwards was long and drawn out.
Let me ask you specifically, because I don't think I've ever asked you this. During that time, you mentioned there were 8 people on the plane. Mm-hmm. Did you reach out? Were you friends with the other wives? I know you were friends with a few. Did you reach out to people right away? Was there like a...
No, I didn't know any other person.
Oh, you didn't?
No, okay. I didn't. Not that was on the plane, and they were all men on the plane, and not all of them were married.
So it was after that you had
yes,
connected? Okay.
Afterwards is when I connected with other people there. So that kind of sums up just the actual story. Do you want to go ahead and tell yours now?
I think let's push through into kind of the next part, and okay. You know, to end up where you are, right? So let's, you know, I know there was, you know, when did you start to kind of feel like you were, well, I wouldn't ask that, I was going to say like move forward, mm-hmm. But there's a lot in between there that I want to talk about. You know, when did you start going back to work?
Yeah.
What was that like? And, you know, I know after talking to your parents for, you know, years and years, the amount of support that they showed you, and they were, you know, 3.5 hours away. Mm-hmm. Do you remember a lot of that?
Yes, bits and pieces. I don't recall that I ever slept in my house alone again. My parents came and stayed for a really long time. I had friends that would stay with me. Another friend that she came and actually moved in with me for a while before I sold my house. I ended up selling my house. But that time afterwards, my parents were absolutely amazing. They held everything together for me. They did all of the things that I couldn't even think about doing or knowing what to do. And so being that it was a plane crash and, you know, there were a lot of legalities involved, so it was kind of drawn out, a lot of this. And you have to remember, I was 25 at the time, so we didn't have kids. You know, I was kind of in a place where, you know, I didn't want to just be stuck. So it wasn't long after that I did date, probably about a year.
And that's you know, just not to interrupt you, but mm-hmm. A lot of people, they not being in that situation, they can be very, very judgmental about when they think you should start dating someone or when they think...
Oh, they tell you all the things.
It's appropriate.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that without being in that situation, you have no idea. And there are certain things that you think that you need in your life, and when you feel like it's time, not that you're closing the door or anything, but you're not allowing it to stay shut. So
right, and there were lots of things that I did that were against what they think you should do when you're grieving. Right, you should not move. You should not get into a relationship, things like that. Well, one of the first things I did was sell my house.
And that'd probably be
I just couldn't live there. I mean, we literally, you know, built it, picked out everything in it, the paint colors, everything screamed Kyle.
Right.
And Angie. I mean, even down to our furniture, it was an unfinished wood set that we stained together in our garage.
Right.
So you know, I just knew, you know, and some people find comfort staying, you know, in a house that they lived in with whoever they lost.
Sure.
You know, I just knew that I could not come home to that every day. So that was one of the first things that I did do, was sell my house. And I moved into a townhouse where I had my lawn mowed for me and I didn't have to worry about the upkeep and things like that. Because like I said, I was 25 and I was clueless about a lot of things in life. So, you know, kind of fast forward a little bit, just because these are all things that we can go into that I'm sure throughout our podcast that we are going to touch base on a lot of things.
Yeah.
one in itself could be the judging, the judgmental things.
Yeah.
But to fast forward to bring, the audience so they know why I'm here right now. So I did clearly end up meeting Trey, and that was in 2007.
2007, but
Yeah.
we had started talking on MySpace.
We did that last episode. I think we mentioned on that.
Right.
I think.
So I don't know if you don't know, her and I had went to middle school together down in Roanoke, and we went through all 3 years together. Never really. We talked a little bit, but not. I mean, it was just in passing, or we knew the same friends. So you said, fast forward years later, in 2000, and I'd say 6, because we talked via direct message on MySpace for about a year. We never picked the phone up.
Yeah, I ended up talking to him, and we ended up starting to date. And keep fast forwarding, we got married in 2009. So, enduring all of that in between time, I felt that I was doing the best I could in navigating my loss. I went to therapy. I took medication to help, my depression and anxiety, things like that.
And not just you; those around you needed that kind of support as well.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
So it's
because it was traumatic for other people besides me. And I felt I was doing the right thing, and I was dating, and I found Trey, and we ended up getting married and having kids right away. Got married in 2009. Adeline was born in 2010. And then our second daughter, Corinne, was born in 2013. And I think, here I am. Next week will be 19 years that will be the 19th anniversary of Kyle's death. And I just in the past few years have seen that I don't think that I healed. I think that, I knew that I was young, and I deserved to have a beautiful life and to have kids. But I think that I moved forward, and that masked a lot of my grief and my trauma. And while I felt like I was doing the right thing, I wouldn't change it for the world, because I wouldn't have this beautiful life that I have, or this, wonderful husband and 2 great daughters. But I think the older that I've gotten, I realized that I didn't heal. I didn't understand. I was telling Trey earlier, I didn't understand that the two can coexist, that I can still fully live a wonderful life while still grieving what I had. They have to coexist. It's not a place that I have to live all the time, nor should I, because that's unhealthy. But that is part of my story. That is my life, and that is a place where I can go and I can be. So I'm here doing this because it's a story that needs to be told. And just from talking with other widows that I've met along my journey, just them hearing my story, they've said has helped them.
Yep.
So, that kind of brings us to this podcast and this community, Resilience Reborn, because throughout the years, yes, I have been really resilient. I've been kicked back down a lot of times because it just comes up whenever it wants. There's no rhyme or reason.
Yes, it does. And I haven't as personally dealt with as much as you have, but I've noticed it over the last couple of years, especially after my father had passed away. So you typically on the anniversary, because I know typically when to keep my distance and be a little more just easy about everything as much as I can, unless I forget. And matter of fact, this year, I think you had already told me, and I was like, oops, I totally missed that. So, and this is something that you had been mentioning to me for years, which leads me to that. The book that you had read, it was called The Body Keeps Score.
Oh yeah, I never finished it, but The Body Keeps the Score. Yeah.
Which I guess just the the title alone is that your body can relive these moments without your brain really getting involved.
Oh, 100%. It's stored. The trauma is stored.
Yeah. And I never knew that until recently, the last couple of years. But
Yeah.
So yeah, I think every year you have
Yeah, and it's and people do ask, it's ingrained in me that this time of year I just go through and I relive it. And it's not that I'm really sad. It's that it was such a traumatic part of my life that it just haunts you, right? And it's there, and I think just that time of year, any anniversary or their birthday, you always celebrated those types of things. Whether they're top of mind, they're just going to come back.
Yep.
They're going to come back, and every year is different with how I cope or I respond to it. This year I'm doing a lot with writing my book, and we're bringing up stuff with our podcast, so it's top of mind for me.
And I think on that, and just even sitting here and talking with you, I feel like, and this is just me guessing, but it's almost like we hide these things to put things in the forefront. But when you're doing something like this, you have to talk about it.
Yeah.
You have to be genuine and and I think that's the power of speaking. When I was growing up, it was something we just didn't talk about.
Yes.
And I think that can really harm you.
Well, and I look at it too this way. I grew up, I had a really amazing life. My parents were wonderful. I hadn't ever experienced loss before. So when this happened, it was like a huge ordeal. I kind of was just raised in a really safe bubble. And so we didn't have much to talk about,
Right.
But when we were growing up, it wasn't a thing. You didn't really talk a lot about, your troubles or your problems or, any type of mental illness, right? So I am thankful that I did have the support, with my parents and other people around me at the time to know that it was okay to talk about it for me. Because I think your story is a lot different. When we dive into that, I actually did seek out therapy and things to help me kind of cope. And I think that helped me 100%.
Sure.
Probably not as much as I needed, but I've been in therapy on and off these whole 19 years. So, yeah, that's kind of why I'm sitting here right now.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing it, because I'd actually learned a couple of things, so that was cool.
Yeah.
So,
all right. So, you want to go into yours?
Yeah. So I'll dive into mine a little bit. And I, kind of I lost my mother at a young age, and I remember, I came from a divorced family, lived about 4 hours away. And, I remember doing the drive back and forth every other weekend, and my parents were really cordial with each other.
But you primarily lived with who?
My mom.
Your mom. Okay.
So, but, every time I would visit my dad, he would always, bring up, why don't you come live with me? And, just because the dad wants to.
Well, here's Stu. Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing malicious behind that whatsoever, but it was, I had always heard it. And it was around 14. It was when I was going into high school, kind of I had thought that would be a good time, changing schools, that it might just be a good time to do it. So I did. I moved up with my dad, and I know it absolutely crushed my mom, that I found out later, which hurts,
Yeah, 100%.
Thinking about those things, like, would you have done things like that over again?
Oh, the what ifs, they get you every time.
Yeah. So I ended up moving up north with my dad in Northern Virginia, and I was 15. I believe I was a junior in high school. Junior?
No.
Sophomore.
Yeah.
No.
A freshman.
I don't know. I was in high school. 15. I remember I was over at some family members' house. I think my cousins I used to hang out with quite a bit. And I remember that night because my dad had come by to pick me up. And he came in, it was a Friday night, and he had already dropped me off. And I might get these details a little, trying to remember this stuff.
Yes.
But I'm pretty sure he had already dropped me off, and then he came back a couple hours later to pick me up. I was like, I just got here, and why are you making me leave? I was very angry about it. I do remember, and it was a quiet ride home, just because I'm sure he had a lot on his mind, obviously, and for me, I was just pissed off.
Yep.
So we get in. I remember walking through the door to his house, and we walk in, and it was just the foyer light on. It was fairly dark, and he asked me to come into the living room. So he said, have a seat, and we sat down, and I said, what's up? And he looked at me, and he said, your mother was in a car crash, and she's no longer with us. And I just remember just kind of glass-eyed look, this kind of, you could have, just a stare, 1,000-yard stare, I remember having a hard time. I didn't hyperventilate anything, but I was just breathing heavy. My heart was pounding, and I didn't know. It was shock, After that, I didn't cry. I didn't cry in front of my dad. I cried a little that night, not much. And I remember specifically feeling guilty about not crying. I thought there was something wrong with me.
Right.
I thought I just didn't care.
Yeah.
And it was. And, the thing that got me the most emotional in the beginning was, I have a half-brother who has Down syndrome. And he was 8 years old at the time. And my mom was his life.
Yeah.
And he was hers. He was the only one left in the house as well after I had left.
Right.
And I was so upset that I had 15 years with her and he only got 8.
Right. So you immediately were already dismissing your feelings.
Yes, absolutely.
And thinking about other people in this tragedy, right?
Right.
Which is telling for, fast forward,
which would haunt me for a while, it seems.
Right.
That was the thing that most upset me. But I remember going to I might have cried a little bit a couple of days later, but it wasn't until I got back down to Roanoke to the funeral home. And we were sitting in the front row, and I remember there was like 400 or 500 people. And the funeral was very small.
Yeah.
They're lined out the door and around the building. And I remember her favorite song was Garth Brooks' The Dance.
Ugh.
And
don't tell me.
To this day,
they played that.
They played it. They played it, the very first song, and I just bawled. But to this day, I can't listen to that song because I will end up in tears.
Oh yeah.
I will end up in tears. And it's just one of those emotional things that hit you out of left field, and
right.
Because of our wedding.
Yeah.
Right. At our wedding, they played Garth Brooks' The Dance, and it was my idea.
Yeah. We wanted to honor her in that moment because there couldn't, be the dance.
The dance.
And so
I lost it.
So you're sitting in the funeral home.
Yeah. So we're sitting in the funeral home, and they let the family go back to see the
viewing, right?
Viewing. And it was open casket.
Yeah.
And I was the first one to walk up, and that's when I realized it was real.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that logically I knew it was real, but I don't think that my body or something did not.
You're a kid. You were a kid.
Yeah, something didn't believe that it was real.
Yeah. Until
I saw it.
Yeah.
And then, I lost it again.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I don't remember a lot, kind of like you. After that, a lot of it was a blur.
Life just keeps going. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I had a little bit different because I never went to any kind of therapy. I never talked to anybody. I never.
Right. You didn't even, it wasn't really brought up in your household.
It wasn't, it wasn't a dialogue. I'm sure it was in the beginning, but I did such a good job, I guess, of hiding it. And you know, fast forward to when I turned 40, I think it was around 40 years old, that I had asked my father. I was angry one night, and I had asked him. I said, "Why didn't you take me to therapy?"
What was his response?
He said, "I wish I'd have done a lot of things different." He said he probably should have went to therapy too.
Yeah.
But he did say, because I thought you acted like you were just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, well, I thought that's what I was supposed to do.
Yeah, you didn't know any different.
Right. I mean, that was back, that was in the 90s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and that was still the common census was, you didn't talk about things as much, especially mental health. And, if you had a therapist, then there's something really wrong with you, I guess. Right. So I guess my point behind that is, if you're in a situation like this where a young child loses a parent, don't let them fool you into thinking they're okay.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're not.
Right.
As much as the front they want to put on, they are not. And I know that I probably, saw everybody else being okay around me, so I thought everything was fine, right? So it all plays a part. I think you have to grieve together and work through things together as a family when things like that happen. It sounds like you had a lot of that experience. Not that either one was right or wrong, but I think that now that I know, I definitely wouldn't go down the path that I took.
Right. Right, because, and so let's just fast forward just a little bit with you. You didn't quite, cope. You didn't have an outlet to cope or a way to deal with it. So
yeah, and
in hindsight, you resorted.
Yeah, so I did, and what you're getting as alcohol. So I started drinking alcohol. I think it started out as every weekend thing, 15 years old, going out drinking with your friends. And I was when I got up to Northern Virginia, I was very introverted. I didn't have a lot of friends, and alcohol loosened that up. Yep. And it kind of, it just, not that I was thinking about my mom and I was sad. It was something else. Yep. And I was just covering it up. And I would drink quite a bit. And I noticed as I drank more, I could outdrink a lot of people. That a lot comes from your intake. Yeah. And I was just a bigger guy. And it just, as you go on, you keep getting more and more and more.
And it was just a part of your life.
It was a part of my life. It was a part of my family's life. I was around it all the time. It was something that made me feel better. I can say I was never on any kind of medication as a kid, unless it was, ibuprofen or something. But I rarely took any kind of medicine, definitely not any antidepressants or anything like that. These things you hear about now, the ADHD and the, all these things that people talk about, back then was like, oh, they're just lazy, or they're, the stigmas around this kind of stuff. So I continued to drink on the weekends, and it was just a lifestyle. Yep. And then, I had moved out and bought my house at 18, and then that's when there was no buffer. Yeah.
You can do whatever you want.
Do whatever I want. Guess whose party the house, guess whose house the party was at. Yeah. Kind of thing. And so that ended up turning into an every night thing for me. I would come home from work, go to the gym, go home, drink. Get up at 4:35 in the morning. I'd come in late, or I'd have excuses. But most of it was from just drinking all night, right. But it was somewhat controlled because I could function, do the work, right, and everything.
Well, clearly, and I mean, and you have a great life now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But it wasn't until when you were about 41 that
it all came to a head.
It all came to a head, right? And so through that is when you pretty much, correct me if I'm wrong, but you found out that your alcohol was probably because you never dealt with your mom's death.
After talking to quite a few, because I do see therapists now, and I do take medication to help, some of the things that go on with me as far as, sometimes depression, sometimes this, because I still am, I stopped drinking 3.5 years ago.
Yeah.
As you know, because it was a huge part of my life, but it was also a huge problem in my life and a huge problem for my family in my life. So I ended up, I had to go get help. I had to get help. My family supported me through all of it. And through that, when I started to feel my own feelings instead of covering up my feelings, because I had never dealt with that kind of stuff before. But
while you were getting that help is when they helped you find that connection, that there's a reason why you went down this path.
Absolutely. Because it just, nothing was taken care of in the beginning. And apparently, even as I was talking to a psychiatrist about this, even as an adolescent, in the changes your bodies and your brain and everything are going through, then you, as it's developing and you have this major traumatic loss or traumatic thing happen to you, it changes the dynamics of how you're developing.
Right.
And I had no idea about this.
Right.
And it explains a lot, but I would never blame it on that.
Right.
I always I'll take the blame because I feel like I'm a fairly smart individual and can see that kind of stuff. But when it came to alcohol, I was not smart.
Right.
Like it kind of shut that part of the brain off, and it was like, now I'm good, because you used to always get on me about it, right? And it didn't matter. I would, once you finally got on me enough, I just started hiding, right? Which is the worst thing you can do,
right?
Which put me into where I was, where I had to make that decision to stop drinking or lose my life or my family, and that was the choices,
right?
Those were the choices. Well on my way, and we'll get into, because I really want to dive into to my alcoholism.
Oh, there's so much. Yeah, there's so many things. But
another episode. But the point is, as I covered that stuff up, and it just building up, and it eventually comes to a head. But I'm so fortunate now to be able to have you all support me. It's this stuff is an open topic in our household. We don't.
No sugarcoating.
No, and it's a wide open dialogue.
Yep.
Even when it comes to the alcohol, our girls know they can talk to me about it, or they can question something they don't understand,
right,
that they think maybe I'm doing.
Right.
But
this is why you're sitting here right now. This, that story, my story is why we're here.
Right. And I will tell you that even in sobriety, I lost my father a couple of years back from cancer.
Yeah. So the story goes on.
Yeah, it does. And so I lost my father from cancer a couple of years ago, and it took a toll on me. It was devastating. Because I feel like we grew closer during that time because he was sick, and because he was more focused on that, and I was focused, because you didn't never know how much time you have. And
your relationship did change. It had a different dynamic there.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that happened when you got sober.
It did.
Yeah, I think that it opened your eyes to a lot of things, and so
yeah, because I would push people away.
Right.
I wouldn't want to deal. If something adverse came up for me, whether we got into a fight or whether something didn't go right at work, it was the fix.
Yeah.
Have a drink, right? It's legal. They sell it at every store. What's the matter with it, right?
So you lost your father.
Yeah.
And then just this past June.
Yeah, lost my stepfather. So who was another huge part of my life.
Yeah.
Because, my mother and stepfather I lived with for, at least 10 years down there.
Yeah.
In Roanoke, and then when I moved up with my father, so everybody that kind of raised me has passed on, and that's tough to I think I was 42 at the time, so
that's a lot.
It is, but I will say I stayed sober. I had the support of my family and my friends and the community I surround myself with, which is another reason I think community is such a strong, it can pull you through a lot.
Well, and I think that's what we're hoping for too, that, we both, had people, when our losses happened, but I think there's just so much that's not touched on, that's not spoken.
Yes.
And we're kind of coming together to help other people. You can take one piece of information that we said today and you can take that with you. You don't have to, use everything that we say or 100% agree, but we know that in this space, we want to communicate and we want to help and
bring those topics to the surface
and no, you're not alone, right?
Yeah,
you're not alone. There's nothing wrong with speaking about anything, that it's all relevant. It is all relevant. There's no right, there's no wrong. So I think that just, that's kind of where we'll end today. Just, kind of knowing our stories. Hopefully they have inspired you a little bit and maybe want to, share yours or, dive deeper into where you're at on your journey.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it does help people share their story as well.
Yeah.
But we have a lot more to get into.
Yeah, we really do.
There's so many different topics we can touch on this stuff, and
it's really hard to stay on topic.
Yeah, well,
hopefully we did a really good job. But
with my rambling brain, I can go down rabbit. So thank you for keeping me in line. I'm sure you guys saw that.
But anyways, there'll be more to come, but we are glad that you were here with us today in this space and can't wait till next time.
Yes, thank you so much.